Do you ever feel like some people just figured out what they were supposed to do with their lives? My predecessor, one of my predecessors, Harry Schofield, many of you know, used to wake each morning to sit with poems. At least this is what I know, and if I've got it wrong, you can tell me afterwards. He would, as far as I can tell, go out into his garden and commune with them. He would set them to memory, and then he'd be in their company for days or weeks at a time. And they would, I imagine, reveal layers of themselves to him. A word, a phrase, would press itself forward for contemplation one day, another stanza might do so the next. And he, like so many before him, would press and bounce his life against and through the words and images, knowing himself and the world more deeply through his communing with the text. This general technique, of course, is not new to Harry. It is, I would say, just another version of what for centuries in Christianity alone is a practice called Lectio Divina. That practice was a kind of sacred reading and communing with a text. I cannot but imagine that in other religious and spiritual traditions there has not been the same thing. The chanting in so many traditions is a different way, of course, of communing with the text and letting it reveal itself, inviting it to take you someplace beyond it. Harry simply applied this spiritual practice to non-canonical texts, you might say, to poetry. There was a time for most of my ministry, in fact, when I would hold back repeating a poem in service, keeping kind of a running list of what I'd used before. Maybe I thought I owed people novelty, or I feared that folks would think I didn't have enough grist for the mill if I used the same works, if I had us revisit them. Now, I think there are some poems that ought to walk with us, like regular guests and companions in our lives. Now I think we all should ideally have some poetry we carry with us, set to memory like surahs from the Quran or the sayings of Confucius or gospel truths we had to memorize as children, that become a tool for living that we can call on when we need them. For me, that private library of sacred texts are ones that I say lines from, that anchor me sometimes in small storms in life, that remind me in a moment of things that I know I forget too easily. And they can also be like remembering that I have wings and just what it takes to get the air under them and the invitation to fly. So, for instance, Mary Oliver's poem, Morning in a New Land, is one I think I've shared with you at least 3 times already, and I've only been here 2 years. In fact, I cannot actually sing Morning Has Broken anymore without thinking of her poem layered through on top of it. Morning has broken like the first morning, the hymn's poetry says. Mary Oliver, the Pulitzer-winning American poet, depicts that first morning and how it would feel standing on a hill, facing into the dawn, what it would imprint on us to have stood there. So I impose it upon you again. She writes, "In trees still dripping night, some nameless birds woke, shook out their arrowy wings and sang, slowly like finches sifting through a dream. The pink sun fell like glass into the fields, 2 chestnuts and a dapple gray, their shoulders wet with light, their dark hair streaming, climbed the hill. The last mist fell away. And under the trees beyond time's brittle drift, I stood like Adam in his lonely garden on that first morning, shaken out of sleep, rubbing his eyes, listening, parting the leaves like tissue on some vast, incredible gift." Don't you love that image? Adam, alone in his lonely garden before all the complications would unfold. The quiet of it all, the newness. Waking, rubbing his eyes, wondering, and then that sense of him pulling back leaves to see for the first time this whole world. I don't have the poem memorized. I'm actually not great with memorization, but I do have that last line set to memory like tissue on some vast, incredible gift. To me, walking the dog in the morning, getting out of bed, just being alive, it hits me sometimes. It yanks me back onto that imagined hill, standing right beside Adam in the quiet and remembering that all this, unwrapped daily, is a vast, incredible gift. May Sarton said her poetry is, quote, "the sacramentalization of ordinary life." That doesn't mean it takes only the good or the easy. But it does mean it holds it up in a way that frames it. At least the poetry I love most does. It holds up life, loss, beauty, love, the body, each day differently. And after looking at it through the poet's eyes, there's often a textured sense of its power and place in the order of things that we might not have grasped or had forgotten to remember. This includes making sense of the worst in life. Take Wisława Szymborska and her poem, The End and the Beginning. Szymborska, of course, was a Polish poet and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1996, who lived out her life in Poland, enduring the ravages of World War II. And indeed, war and terrorism figure frequently in her work. This translation of The End and the Beginning is by Stanislaw Baranchuk and Claire Kavanagh, and from the collection View with a Grain of Sand. And it names what happens after war and the movement beyond what seemed unforgettable. After every war, someone has to tidy up. Things won't pick themselves up, after all. Someone has to shove the rubble to the roadside so the carts loaded with corpses can get by. Someone has to trudge through sludge and ashes, through the sofa springs and shards of glass, the bloody rags. Someone has to lug the post to prop the walls. Someone has to glaze the window, set the door in its frame. No sound bites, no photo opportunities, and it takes years. All the cameras have gone to the other wars. The bridges need to be rebuilt, the railroad stations too. Shirt sleeves will be rolled to shreds. Someone, broom in hand, still remembers how it was. Someone else listens, nodding his unshattered head. But others are bound to be bustling nearby, who'll find all that a little boring. From time to time, someone still must dig up a rusted argument from underneath a bush and haul it off to the dump. Those who knew what this was all about must make way for those who know little and less than that. And at last, nothing less than nothing. Someone has to lie there in the grass that covers up the causes and effects, with a cornstalk in his teeth, gawking at clouds. Somehow, poetry makes the confusing normal, the awful more bearable. That after war, the cameras gone away, the disposing of carnage and devastation beginning slowly, the rebuilding, the simple act of replacing windows and doors hung back on their door frames, life will go on. And it begins as if nothing happened, at least for some. And that is just as it is, as perhaps it must be, like the grassy fields that bloom over Gettysburg battlefields. Beginnings often involving eventually forgetting most of what came before. The sacramentalization of ordinary life, the making ordinary of the hardest realities. When we cry, "Why me?" poetry answers, "Why not you?" Poetry can be a companion and a witness to our pain, to the cognitive dissonance of life as it is, and it can also be a partner in our outrage. It also has this uncanny ability to throw a frame around what needs to be seen that folks would rather not look at straight on. I think of the way Langston Hughes throws a frame around America that is loving and unblinking, too. I, too, sing America, he writes. I, too, am America. Or his haunting question and answer of what happens to a dream deferred. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Perhaps my favorite way poetry is our partner in justice and transformation is how it can use metaphor to lure us in. Poetry can be like this Trojan horse that convicts and changes us before we had a chance to raise our defenses against it. Have you ever had that experience with a poem? Like Maya Angelou's caged bird in her poem by that name. You think you're reading about a bird until you realize you're reading about our neighbors' bodies and voices and spirits, clipped and strangled. She begins, "A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips its wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom." Poetry offers so much to us. It makes sacred the ordinary. Each day, the curtain of dawn parted like tissue on some vast, incredible gift. Poetry offers us meaning plumbed in the depths of watching a mother in her garden, or the slow roll of history from painful endings to beginnings which inevitably forget us. Poetry can be a frame around life that holds our focus to the gorgeous or the painful and hard to face, calls us to our ideals and to reckon with our failures. We choose poems, I think, and sometimes they choose us because we need each other. My hope is that the ones we carry with us serve a lot of purposes, but that a few that we carry in life with us are ones that can offer us a way home should we lose our way. I think in this vein of Mary Oliver's words in her poem Wild Geese, when she writes, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." Or Gwendolyn Brooks, the first African-American poet to win the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, her advice in Speech to the Young, in which she writes, "Live not for battles won, live not for the end of the song, live in the along." Words that pull us back from the brink to some life-sustaining place. Perhaps my favorite poem in this category is Derek Walcott's poem, Love After Love. Walcott is a St. Lucian poet, he's a playwright, he was a watercolorist, and the winner of the 1992 Nobel Prize in Literature. His work, Love After Love, is a poem which, for me at least, is about those times when we lose ourselves, as we inevitably do in life. Maybe we've given ourselves over too much to a lover, or to good or bad causes, or traded our lives in for a job, or served a false god of any kind, and there are many. And in such moments when we realize that it can feel like we have betrayed ourselves, and there can be regret and sadness and even rage, but Walcott isn't interested in any of that. He wants us to focus instead on the joy of the reunion, on the falling in love with finding ourselves again. He writes, "The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, 'Sit here, eat.' You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image off the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life." Nobel Prize-winning Irish poet Seamus Heaney wrote, "The aim of the poet and the poetry is finally to be of service." And May Sarton said in an interview once, "If I were in solitary confinement, I'd never write another novel or probably not keep a journal, but I'd write poetry. Because poems, you see, are between God and me." May we choose our poems well. The ones we need find and choose us too. May they be of service, finding their way to where we need them to lodge, sharpening our vision, reigniting fires that need to be relit, anchoring us in places so we can weather the storms, small and large, that rage around us, and always there to lead us back home to ourselves. Amen.